Well, today we are talking about college football programs. We are power ranking the college football programs. We've done this for several years in a row now. And well, we just talked about the the portal opening tomorrow. That won't really have much an effect on this. This is not necessarily a ranking of teams for this upcoming season or even where they stand right now just as an individual team. This is more about the program. So it's not just what did you do last year? What are you going to do this year? It's more of a snapshot of maybe 3 years, maybe you want to go 5 years. Maybe you're looking for the last 150 years. What has this program been like? I don't go back that far, obviously. But what is the strength of each program in the country right now, and how would we rank the top 10? And Ashton, before we jump into it, I just got to say this is a really difficult. There's to me, it felt like there's 12 or 13 programs right now that should be top 10 programs. They feel like top 10, and just by definition, someone gets left out.
We've bitten off more than we can chew with this one. I think that's when I was doing my research, that's kind of where I came out at it. So we have to somehow get down to 10 names,
Mhm.
and how you pick between 6 and 15 is like anyone's guess, really.
Mhm.
Not anyone's guess, but like you could make an argument for 10 teams to go into 5 spots there. So yeah, we've bitten off more than we can chew. I know who my number one program is right
Yeah,
now. I've got
right.
that one figured out. I don't feel like we'll have an argument there. But the arguments may even start as soon as two. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. Do we just want to get into this, or like what are
Well,
we thinking here?
just really quickly before we jump into specifics, uh, I'll just kind of share some of my thought process on this, and you tell me where you differ from me. I kind of looked at the last 3 years on the field. So take it personally, I like F plus. It combines a couple different computer rankings. Um, what was the quality of the team on the field the last 3 years, last year especially? And also, I want to see what teams do in the recruiting world. I want to see what kind of talent they're accumulating. So the first one, what were you the last 3 years? That's backward facing a little bit, and the recruiting, I view it as a little bit more forward facing. So you kind of get a combination of both. Um, and again, recruiting rankings, I also kind of double value their last class because that gives a little bit more accurate assessment of where a school might be right now as opposed to a class several years ago. And then I also try to consider like the coaching staff, especially the head coach. How much stability do you have there? That doesn't just mean automatically that if you have a new coach this year that you're getting docked, but who that coach is could make a difference. If you have a coach that's been, there for a long time. I don't know. So that's all. That's a bit of a rambling thought process there. Where would you agree with me, and where would you maybe see a few other things that you would differ on?
No, I think you're right by valuing the most recent year a little bit extra because I mean that's our last data point, right? And there are
Mhm.
trends, like programs do go up and down. I think I value coaches maybe, yeah, I mean heavy. I value
Mhm.
like coaching stability. I value that a lot. So yeah, for example, like Alabama losing Saban and now having DeBoer. We think DeBoer's a really good coach, especially good at offense and really good at X's and O's, but he's not the greatest of all time, like the guy that was, in his
Right.
office before him. So like that does destabilize Alabama as a program for me, just for a little bit. It's not far. They're not dropping out, they're not going to five. Like Alabama's still really high,
Mhm.
but they're not going to be number one for me either. So
Sure.
yeah, I think coaching stability is really, really important. Like Michigan losing Harbaugh for me is a big deal
Yeah.
currently, and until I see proof, that Sharon Moore is good, and then I'm willing to go back in. But we saw that what Harbaugh did worked at Michigan, and now he's gone. So
Mhm.
things like that matter for me. I value that a lot. I think that kind of goes hand in hand with recruiting. I think a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times in college football, if you get coaching stability, the recruiting or at least the hit ratio on recruiting is high. I think it's very high, and also your retention in the transfer portal era, your player retention, I think can be really high. So that I look for that a lot. Um, there are certain programs like LSU. Like what do you do with LSU? LSU's had different coaches and they've won national titles a bunch of different ways.
Mhm.
And just recruiting their state, like that's kind of all they really did. Like so, there's certain outliers like LSU who's had a ton of turnover, but you're still not going to rank them low just because they have such a high floor. Like the floor there for LSU just feels so high because even coaches that aren't even really any good have won titles there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, like there's certain programs. We're gonna get into the weeds on this. We're gonna have some arguments, and it's gonna be okay. I've not told you my top 10. I don't know your top 10.
Right.
So yeah, this will be fun.
Well, I have a feeling we're the same at the top. I have Georgia at number one. That was maybe the easiest one on this list by far. Georgia has been very good the last 3 years. They're recruiting exceptionally well. They have an established head coach, Kirby Smart. Do we need to go on? Like, it's Georgia, right?
Yeah, no, it is for me too. It is easy. I mean, they've won 2 of the last 3 championships, and
Mm-hmm.
truthfully, as a Georgia fan, I'm trying to bring this up too much because it is sour grapes. If Georgia makes the playoff last year, if Georgia does make the playoff somehow, they would have been favored over any of the other teams. They would have
Yeah.
been. Like that's just how Vegas had them. So, yeah, Georgia is they're kind of a monster right now. They're recruiting at the highest level. They're the single best recruiting program in the country. So it's not going to tail off. I think for Kirby and Smart, I think Nick Saban leaving in his mind is a huge relief. He doesn't have to go against that guy anymore because those guys they recruited the same dudes. Like they're going after
Mm-hmm.
the same recruits, and now there's just one less of them. Like now I don't have another coach that's always going after these guys with me and can take them from me. So yeah, Georgia's one. I think there's a gap. Like I'm with you.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a gap between 1 and 2.
So in a hypothetical world, if Saban and Harbaugh were still at Bama and Michigan, how would those be the next 2 schools, like 2 and 3 in some order? Because for me, I think Michigan would be right here at number 2 if Harbaugh was still there. I just can't do it with Sharon Moore as the first time head
Yeah,
coach and Harbaugh being one of the great coaches in college football history, out on his way to the NFL. That for me was a huge differentiator. So right away we're already changing the list just based on recent
hypotheticals.
events. Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of. So I guess I won't have Michigan at 2. I'm still going to have them very high. But how does that change your list? Would they be 2 for you or Alabama? What would you be looking at?
I mean, Alabama would be 2, and
Sure.
honestly, this might sound funny. Alabama would almost be closer to 1. Like
Yeah.
that sounds very strange, but how are you putting Nick Saban at 2? We did like even last year we did some program ranking stuff, and like it was trending there already. Georgia had won back to back, and yeah, Nick Saban's such a huge deal. Like he's such
Yeah.
a big deal, and he has such a big shadow. So like him leaving does drop Alabama for me. There's no doubt. Um, but I do think the point is fair. I may have Michigan farther down than you do. That
Mhm.
may be one we disagree on. I think Harbaugh leaving was a really big deal. I would probably, if those coaches would have stayed, I probably would have been Georgia, then very small gap, then Alabama, then very small gap, then Michigan.
Yeah.
Like just bang, 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 top 3 in that order. But you could have swapped any of those 3 out, and I wouldn't have been. Yeah, like you would at least have an argument. So whereas now there's not really an argument. Like Kirby is the top of the sport right now.
So who is your number 2?
I was hoping you would go first. Um,
I'm ready.
okay.
I have it figured out, but
I'm going to make a case. I understand that a lot of people will say Alabama should be number 2 because of the history. And I do understand that. We haven't seen like we've never seen someone follow, a legend and be super, super successful. Like at least not in recent history. I think it's difficult when a guy like Tom Brady leaves. Like it's
Mhm.
difficult to replace him. I think New England's finding that out. It's hard to replace legends. And yeah, does that mean they're not worthy of the number 2 spot? Could I talk you into Ohio State? Like
That's my number 2, honestly.
it might be it. Well, they're not my number 2. Yeah, I'm still. This one's very difficult for me. This one's very, very close. How can you put Ohio State at 3 when or at 2 when they've continually lost to Michigan the last 3 years? Like,
Yeah.
explain that one for me, because that's a whole nother thing. So like you have Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan. Michigan's beaten all those teams, all of them, and I know their coach left. But like Ohio State, do you feel good about Ryan Day in big games? Please don't tell me you do, because he's not been good at all in big games.
Not really. I don't feel good about anybody at 2. Um, I just If I'm looking at Ohio State, they have been a top 4 or 5 team in the country for the last 3 years. Now, clearly, they were not a top 1 or 2 program in the country or team in the country, other than you could argue 2022 when they lost in the semifinal to Georgia.
Yeah.
That was just weird because that was right after they had lost to Michigan and Michigan lost to TCU in the playoff. That was just a weird season. We did see a nice high ceiling for Ohio State. They just couldn't quite pull it out against Georgia, who was clearly the best team in the country. Recruiting wise, it's been top 5. And if you look at current recruiting, like class of 25, like rising seniors, they have the number 1 class in the country. It's looking like an incredible class. Yeah, if anything, they're trending up in recruiting. They're still a top 5 team on the field every year. I think this year they might even be better than that. Like this year, I do have them probably as the number 2 team in the country. It's not that I view them as close to Georgia. I just don't know that I could put anyone else in that spot. Bama, I'll spoil it right away. I already give my 2 and 3 before you give your 2, but Bama is the closest thing for me, and they have a brand new coach. So, yeah, I mean, what's better, the new guy in Kalen DeBoer, who has a very good record, but is doing this for the first time at a program at that level, or a guy like Ryan Day who's been there for 5 or 6 years but has never quite gotten over the hump? I don't know. Like, I have some opinions about who I would prefer, and we have a coach draft coming up this offseason. But for right now, I'm taking Ohio State as number 2 and Alabama as the number 3 program in the country.
Is Ryan Day just James Franklin with a larger NIL fund?
No,
You know what I'm
because he's
saying?
not as bad as him on game day. I'm not saying he's amazing, but he's not that bad.
Then why does he lose them all?
He doesn't lose them all.
Almost. What's the last big game that he won?
Well,
Like, what's the last big time win?
he's never lost to Penn State.
I said with an NIL fund. Yeah, I mean Franklin does. Okay, you're right. They beat Penn State. They've lost the last 3 years to Michigan. They lost to Oregon in non-conference. They lost to Georgia. They lost to Missouri. I mean, if you're going to talk me into the Penn State wins, I hear you. I like Penn State. They have talent.
So, for example, real quick, like the computers had Penn State as okay, if I go by F plus, which is kind of my favorite, which combines 2 metrics, they had Penn State as the number 5 team in the country last year, and Notre Dame as the number 8 team in the country last year. They won both of those games. I'm not saying they were the second best team in the country. Obviously, they lost to Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't been as good as Michigan on the field. They've been just behind them by a little bit, and behind almost no one else. Or you could argue on the field, the last 3 years, they've been the 3rd best team in the country.
I'm going to take Alabama at 2 for me in my program rankings. And the reason is I do think it's the talent, and I do like DeBoer. I do think it's very, very difficult what he's going to do. I think he has an incredibly difficult task to somehow pull off there and make those fans happy. I think that's extremely hard. Yeah, I'm going to buy in to what he's doing there. I think like his ability to retain that roster, the departures from the Alabama roster, everyone talked about him, and we did here on this podcast. He's done a good job of keeping guys there, kind of stopping the bleeding there a little bit. They're starting to recruit a little bit as well, like to kind of get their own momentum started. It's so difficult when a huge guy like Saban leaves to accurately judge the guy that came in. I think that's extremely hard. So I'm going to go with Alabama at 2. I didn't love either one, Alabama or Ohio State. It would have been so much easier had Harbaugh stayed and Saban left. If Saban leaves and Harbaugh stays, you go Georgia, Michigan. Like that's a cinch. And now it's a lot difficult when they both leave. So I'll go Alabama 2, Ohio State 3. We disagree on that one.
It's splitting hairs though, because I don't necessarily disagree with you strongly at all. I actually really like the Kalen DeBoer hire. Like, that man just wins games everywhere he's been. And it's not that he's shown the ability to be a great recruiter, but I do think Alabama's NIL game is going to step up significantly now that they're not getting the Saban discount anymore.
Yeah.
they're going to be just fine recruiting wise. They might not be the top recruiting power in the country for the next 10 years like they were under Saban. They're going to be a top 5 recruiter consistently. And that guy, like you were asking if Ryan Day is James Franklin, like Kalen DeBoer is the opposite of that. Kalen DeBoer,
Correct.
there's no questions about him on game day or scheme wise or anything like that. To me, it's Alabama and Ohio State very close. Um, for the program power rankings, I guess there's still a little bit more of a question mark for me. Just having a new coach with Alabama, I think the ceiling is probably higher. But we kind of know what Ohio State's floor is under Ryan Day, and it's still pretty freaking high.
It is very high. He beats the teams that he's favored above. It's the ones where like the talent is equal, or sometimes his play calling. I don't even know if it's his play calling. I would say maybe like team culture. It feels like they get a little soft late in games, like big games that they're not blowing people out. So, and I would say maybe a little bit the same thing about Penn State. They just kind of play super tight. Their players get like tense, especially in games. That's kind of maybe where the Franklin comp came. It's not a very good one. Like Ryan Day is a better coach, especially a better game day coach. He coaches circles around Franklin on game day. I just maybe with a little bit of the makeup there, like the composite of their or the composition of their roster, I think is a little maybe similar a little bit. But okay, so we got the top 3. I go Georgia, Bama, Ohio State. You go Georgia, Ohio State, Bama. That's you at 4. Can you go first, Jared?
I'll go next. It's actually 4 is pretty easy for me. I got Texas at 4.
Okay.
I like what they're doing. They're trending upward under Sark.
It was 1 year. It was 1 year.
Well, they
1
were
year. They had
so
one time.
It's a fair point. They're recruiting absolute gangbusters, and in 2022 they were better than their record showed. Like they were actually a pretty good team in 2022 too. That was a lot of twos. But Texas, I think, clearly is trending upward under Sark. I think that he's done a pretty good job with his staff. I don't know that it's all perfect. And again, like I said, it's pretty easy for them at 4, and the reason I think that is because I think there's a pretty big gap from three down to 4, and then I sort of see a gap after them too. But they've been very good. They just went to the playoff. I mean, who's to say they wouldn't have won the national title if they hadn't had so many turnovers against Washington in the semifinal game? It's possible they could have beaten Michigan. Obviously, that's a hypothetical. That didn't actually happen, and I probably would have picked Michigan to win that game. But Texas has been trending up. They're very good on the field, off the field. No one has money like Texas. It's a different Texas program the last 2 years from what we had seen for the previous 15 years. Put it that way.
So 1 year from 1 year of Texas performing well on the field and winning a Big 12 that was the Big 12 they weren't top heavy, right? There was no Titans at the top. It's a very deep league and a lot of really solid middle teams, but it wasn't, you know what I'm saying? Like it's not the SEC or the Big 10 with Titans at the top. Texas won the Big 12 and then lost their playoff game. I'm just saying they lost their playoff game and we're putting them at 4. Like that's what one playoff appearance is enough for you, huh?
I'm probably blinded a little bit too much by the dollar signs. I like if I'm power ranking programs, I like programs that have the ability to just outspend everybody and the willingness that goes along with the ability. And it's possible that a year from now I could look back at this and think, what was I doing? I just think that they've done such a good job of building that roster in a way that we hadn't seen a Texas roster look in a long time, in the trenches. And you throw that with a guy who is really a kind of an offensive genius, honestly, in Sark. And I think they're going to be a mainstay in the top 10 minimum. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see them in the top 5 in the country for years to come.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I'm just saying they didn't win much. Like
Sure.
Texas and Ohio State, they lost to teams that were on their playing field, and they beat up on the teams that were below them last year. I mean, that's what happened.
You might be
Anyway,
talking me away from the gap that I was talking about from 4 to 5. Yeah,
okay.
you make some good points.
I'm going with Michigan at 4. Give me the team that's made the playoff the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I understand they've lost their coach. Here's why I have them above Texas. The ability to not recruit super well and still develop NFL players has been elite under Harbaugh. I think Sharon Moore, I mean, you can see like the connection that those two have. What did it for me for Michigan was the fact that Harbaugh was gone, or at least not on the sidelines, for a lot of those big games. The Penn State game, he was gone. The Ohio State game, he didn't coach either. The two biggest games of Michigan's year, right? He was not on the sidelines for. Michigan won both of those. I was really impressed with how they played. They went, they went going to Happy Valley and doing that like right after Harbaugh gets suspended. I thought that was a huge win. Kind of just the way they just kind of pummeled Penn State, and Penn State got tight. That's a whole other conversation. But I was impressed with Michigan without Harbaugh. I'm going to give Sharon Moore credit for that. There's a reason why I don't have Michigan at 2. And it is because Harbaugh did leave, right? So I am accounting for that. I mean, for me, that's been factored in. I have already factored that in by having them at 4. They've recruited well at certain spots. Quarterback, they've done a really good job at recruiting, which I think is that's a huge place, to have a potential 5-star type guy. I thought they've done a good job, of keeping talent there. So I'm going to have Michigan ahead of Texas. I want to see Texas earn it. I'm going to drop Texas to 5. Texas won the Big 12 last year. That's all they did. That is all they did. They were favored to win the Big 12, and they did win it. And that's it. Like they beat Alabama. That was an impressive win for Texas. I understand that. Michigan's had so many more big time wins, so many more. So I'm going to go with Michigan. Does the fact that Sharon Moore is a first-time head coach concern me? Sure. Yes, absolutely. I think Sark is clearly doing a really, really good job at Texas, not disparaging Texas at all. You mentioned that, okay, Michigan is tight-pocketed for whatever reason. They have all kinds of money. They don't spend it. They just like kind of keep pinching pennies on that stuff. Texas is not. They'll buy Ferraris for the whole crew. Like they'll buy them for everyone. So in that way, I do like, like Texas as a university. I think that like overall that program has a higher ceiling than Michigan's, like long-term. Right now, I would still have Michigan ahead of them just due to the last 3 years. And I mean, Michigan, they're the defending champ right now too. So, and they will play each other, by the way. They'll play each other in is it week 3, I think, of this year, where Texas
Something
goes
like
to
that.
Michigan. It's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, I'll have Michigan at 5. Michigan at 4, Texas 5. I'm sure you probably have the same order, just reversed.
Yes,
I'm assuming
I have
there.
Michigan at 5. I might be just a little bit more down on Sharon more than you are.
Okay.
They didn't recruit super well the last few years under Harbaugh, and we've talked about that a lot. If you look at the 25 class, it's not looking pretty. They have 3 commits in the class. One of them is just barely a top 150 kid in the composite. No one else is in the top 300. It's I guess if I'm trying to balance what they've been and what they will be, I'm really high on what they've been. What they've been is the second best program in the country the last 3 years. What they will be, I don't know, man. Like, are we sure they're going to be ahead of Penn State 2 years from now in these rankings? I'm not sure. I don't know. Not to mention Oregon's coming into the league. I don't know. I've got Michigan at 5 because of what they've been. I'm guessing that 2 years from now, I'm going to have them lower. That's kind of my prediction.
So we have them at 5, but you're planning on dropping them, kind of. Is hedging
I
your
wouldn't
bet
be
there, really.
surprised. Put it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fair point. Like, I think we haven't seen an offseason, right, with Sharon Moore. I mean, I think that's important, to judge. And the recruiting has I understand, how that bothers you. but the recruiting's been there. Like that
Yeah,
recruiting has not ever been great. It's been okay at times, okay at best, really, under Harbaugh. So yeah, I mean, like they're winning championships. They're going to probably set a record for the amount of they will either tie or set the record for amount of NFL players drafted off of one team. And like so they're clearly developing studs that that have NFL futures, which is, I mean, that's the real measure of success. Like how many NFL guys do you have on your roster? Like you can determine
sure.
even more from that. So they're doing a really good job there. They're more like turning their 3 stars into 5 stars. They're not just going up 1 star; they're going up 2. So when you go to Michigan, so yeah,
I don't deny any of that. If it was just based on recruiting, I would have them as like the number 14 or 15 program in the country.
yeah,
So I'm
no, that's
trying to
fair.
be balanced. It's a struggle.
That's fair. I'm gonna let you go with 6, right? You're going with 6.
Yeah. So
Here's where it's hard.
it is hard here.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, I put together a nifty little Google sheet where I tried to put some data behind all of this based on the last 3 years, overvaluing last year, based on the last 3 recruiting classes, overvaluing last year. And my little formula has Notre Dame at 6. I'm not going to have Notre Dame at 6. It felt a little high to me. I was a little surprised by that, but my number 6 team will be a team that we've compared to Notre Dame a lot. It's going to be Oregon with the second-year coach going to be a third-year coach now, who was the previous superstar defensive coordinator. Really done a good job recruiting. Dan Lanning is one of the biggest names out there. I think they're doing a really good job. He has lost the last 3 games to Washington. I didn't love that, obviously,
Right.
but this is kind of like, I don't know. I view them almost as they're that step right below Ohio State, where they haven't quite been able to get over the hump the last several years. But if you just change 1 or 2 games, it looks so much better. And the recruiting is incredible. The roster looks really good, both sides of the line of scrimmage. He's made 2 good offensive coordinator hires already, which is a big thing, for a defensive coordinator turned head coach. I like Oregon. I like what they're doing. I'll have them at 6.
I agree with you there. The recruiting has been fantastic, by the way. Like we can just go ahead and start out with recruiting for Oregon. They've done a really, really good job and
Mhm.
are really kind of punching above their weight recruiting wise. I think it's difficult to recruit at Oregon. Like he's having to go to Texas, Georgia, Florida, California. Whereas, like he's recruiting against those schools who, like all those schools have to do is just say, hey, stay home, like stay in Georgia, stay in
Mhm.
Texas. Go to Florida State. Don't go to Oregon. Just stay local, and he's doing a really, really good job. I mean, sure, he's got the Nike money, and that's huge. That helps a ton, obviously. The hires of the offensive coordinators have been home runs, really. Like
Yeah.
for a young coach to come in and hit 2 home runs with your offensive coordinator hires, like I mean, his first one was so good that he got hired to be a head coach at a Power Five, well, used to be Power Five school,
Right.
now Core Four school, and he replaced him, and they were like elite still. I mean, Bo
Mhm.
Nix has been a Heisman contender, so he's done a really good job at being aware. He's being aggressive. He's not just being a typical defensive coordinator turned head coach. I agree with you there. The lack of ability to win big games. There are certain teams that just do, and there are certain teams that don't, and he doesn't. And that's
Been a little
concerning.
scary. Yeah.
It's concerning. Kirby, like Kirby did. Kirby just
Mhm.
maybe that's all the years that he had under Saban that allowed him to do it. But like he went to Georgia, he had a rough first year, but the second year he went out and won the SEC and won a playoff game. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
winning those types of big 50-50 games, coin flip type games, when it comes down to coaching, when your players have pretty much neutralized each other out, I think it's huge. That's a sign of where you're going as a program, and so that's concerning a little bit. I still don't think you can put Penn State above them. I don't think you can put
Yeah.
Notre Dame above them. Like you're going to try to talk me into LSU above them. Not right now. Like not right now. I mean, you have an
Yeah.
argument there. Um, yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. Oregon's at 6. I actually, yeah, I feel okay about that one. I think we
Mhm.
probably got that one right.
Sure. Eh, this isn't getting any easier, by the way.
No,
There's 5 programs I want to put in the last. Oh, sorry, 6 programs I want to put in the last 4 slots here, 7 to 10. I am going to pull out Notre Dame now. I'll put them at 7. They've been very consistent, I would say, over the last half decade or so. The first year under Freeman, there were some bad losses. The Marshall, Stanford losses were really bad. Last year, they were clearly improved on the field. Still not where they would like to be. I will say, if we're also looking forward, I think they're going to be even better this year. Like yeah, I just like pretty much everything I hear about spring practice, with the possible exception of offensive tackle. And I still feel like the way Notre Dame recruits offensive line, it can't be that bad, right? Question mark. They just kind of feel like the quintessential top 10 on the field, top 10 recruiting, definitely not top 5 recruiting, probably not top 5 on the field, but in that 6 to 10 range in both areas. I like the growth I've seen in Freeman. I love the offensive coordinator hire this year, Mike Denbrock. Yeah, I don't feel strongly about them as being, well, obviously I don't have them in my top 5. I don't know that I view them as anything higher than 7, but I do feel like 7 is about the right spot for what they've been and what they look like they will be.
I'm going to zag on you a little bit here. For me at number 7, I have Ole Miss.
Oh,
A team that is, yeah, up and coming, doing things a different way. We're going to talk about how their recruiting rankings may not be on par with a lot of these teams, and you're right. Like, I would agree with you there. They don't recruit like these teams above them, but Lane has done a really, really good job of being in the portal a lot. He's had some exceptional classes, obviously, this year. I mean, fantastic, right? That Ole Miss is a team with a really, really strong year this year and a bunch of wins for Ole Miss, which I think is attainable for them. Like, you're going to see them be mentioned even more with these teams up here above them. I think it's a playoff team. I think they're exceptional. I'm going to have them above Notre Dame. Right now, I think Ole Miss just has more talent on their roster than Notre Dame does, and I feel better about Lane on game day than I would with Freeman. That's not derogatory, I don't think, in any way. And Freeman definitely recruits better, but I would give the edge to Ole Miss and Lane right now. I think he's doing things differently, and he's found value. He's found some value in doing things a different way. He's not just doing them differently, just for the sake of it. He's found some value there, and he kind of found his own little niche there. So yeah, he's done a good job. I'm going to have them at 7, roasted away, I guess.
No, they've also been very consistent on the field the last 3 years. Even if the wins didn't always match season to season, like they were always a top 20-ish type of like power ranked team. I like Lane on game day. I think suggesting that they have better talent than Notre Dame right now is a little bit far fetched. Maybe the frontline starters. I don't know about the depth.
Are you saying like in the composite? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no way. There's different ways of looking at talent. I just feel like Notre Dame has recruited significantly better depth across the roster than Ole Miss.
I would agree. Like I'm not saying that Ole Miss has done a good job, like all the way through their roster. I think they've done a really good job in their 2 deep. Like, I think their 2 deep is exceptional. And I would agree with you that, like, will they be able to stand up, long term against these teams? Maybe not. But I mean, their 2 deep is really, really good. So yeah, I think they've got a lot of potential.
Okay, so I'll go next, number 8 here. This is where I'm going to have LSU. Brian Kelly entering his 3rd season there. His first season, they won the SEC West, got killed by Georgia then in the SEC title game, but they did beat Alabama and Nick Saban, who we've talked about a lot. And then last year, the defense fell off a cliff, but they had the best offense in the country and the Heisman winner. So it feels like there's definitely things to build on for this program. You hope that the defensive hires work out for them. I think they probably need a few more guys in the portal, which could very well happen as far as this year, this team. We know that as far as like the money and all that stuff goes, like LSU is absolutely top tier. The reason I have them as low as 8 is probably just because they left me wanting a little bit. Like, it didn't feel like they got better last year from his first year there with Kelly. I don't know. The offense obviously was incredible. They did lose their offensive coordinator to Notre Dame, who I have one spot higher than them. Am I too high, too low? Well, I mean, what do you think about LSU?
This is where I have him as well. At
Okay,
8. I think it's the right spot for him. I agree on a lot of things. I mean, the lack of defense is concerning, but I will say Kelly's ability to come in and immediately start winning big games,
sure.
beating Alabama year one is huge. That is huge. That's beating Alabama with Saban. That's massive for them, right? And they did. You're right. They did get killed by Georgia, and that is what it is. So did everyone else that year too. So it yeah, you can't you're not going to be able to just go by unscathed in the SEC, but I think he did the LSU program we talked, and I mentioned it earlier, I think has just an exceptionally high floor, like
Hmm.
overall.
Yeah.
Just kind of almost regardless of who's at the reins. And I think Kelly's competent. I think he's a good coach. So I like the hires that they've made on defense. I made the changing a defensive coordinator was big.
Yeah.
I thought that was important. You don't love losing Denbrock. I mean, that's not,
Yeah.
that's maybe not a terrific sign. But I think the offense is going to be fine. I really do. I think the offense is going to be really good with Nussmeier there. So
Hmm.
you're factoring a lot of things in there with LSU. You're factoring in it goes by more than just recruiting rankings for me.
Hmm.
It's the fact that they've continually proven over years that we can win kind of whatever way we choose to. Like we can win a lot of different ways. They can win with a lot of offense, like they did in 2019, or a lot of defense, like they did years prior. So there's a lot of different ways for LSU to win. I think as a program, as long as they're competently run, they have an incredibly high floor. The 8 is low, honestly. Like 8 is a little bit low for
Hmm.
LSU. Like I couldn't find a team ahead of them to bump them up. So I have them here. I think it's right. I obviously have Notre Dame a spot below LSU here.
Okay.
Spoiler alert. But like who won the breakup, I guess, between Kelly and Notre Dame.
I kind of think they
Yeah,
both wanted, honestly. I
did
really
they?
do. I,
Yeah.
it, Kelly needed a place where it's a little easier to get the talent, and his recruiting has been just a hair disappointing. Like not bad, just a hair disappointing for LSU standards. But if you look at the 25 class,
It's excellent.
that's turning it around really quick. Um, and then Notre Dame, on the other hand, they needed someone who embraced Notre Dame a little bit more and was a little bit more of a dog on the recruiting trail. And so I really kind of feel like they're both in a better place, at least
Yeah.
looking forward. Yeah, I don't know. You could argue, go back and forth. I'm sure people in certain areas of the country would disagree with people from other certain areas of the country, um,
Mhm.
on which program is a little higher right now. I have Notre Dame one spot higher. You have LSU one spot higher. I can't necessarily say you're wrong. Obviously, doesn't quite match my opinion, but they're very close right now. And LSU higher ceiling, arguably, in at least in the short term. I mentioned 2 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan's a lot lower. I would be surprised if if LSU was in that 5 spot 2 years from now or higher. Like that could very well happen.
There's a world where LSU adapts incredibly well to this alignment where they can get into playoff. They can lose a couple of regular season games to a Georgia or a Texas, still get in the playoff, and just be a nightmare for people and go on a little run because Kelly does have postseason experience, right? So yeah, like that there's absolutely a world where that does happen. And teams
Mhm.
that go on playoff runs, like we're gonna have to start talking about playoff runs, kind of like March Madness runs a little bit, like teams that get hot at the right time. And if you can time that up, you're absolutely right. In 2 years, we could be talking about LSU comfortably in the top
Mhm.
five. This is just where they're at right now. I think the defense for me is a large reason as to why I have them this low. Their defense was terrible last year. It was absolute garbage last year. So yeah, LSU's offense was excellent. Their defense was terrible. That's why I have them so low. This is a program that their ceiling will be at whatever they choose it to be. That like they're
Mhm.
kind of one of those programs that they can be they can go up there and compete with Georgia, with Alabama, with Ohio State. They can be whoever they choose to be. They're not there now. That does not mean that it won't change in a couple of years. It's a good point. LSU probably has the most upward mobility of any of these teams that we're mentioning here, kind of at the last of the top 10 here.
Right. Well, you already said you have Notre Dame at number 9. My number 9 team is going to be Florida State. I love Mike Norvell, maybe too much. Like, I just feel like he has done such a good job of steadying that program, and he wins big games. You don't really question him on game day. He's beaten LSU the last 2 years. Like, is it bad that I have him one spot behind LSU? Maybe. The recruiting hasn't quite been as good as LSU, but they also use the portal very well. You had Ole Miss at 7. I guess maybe this is my version of Ole Miss in my top 10. Those are kind of the two of the more notable portal teams out there. I just feel like he's raised their floor so much. I really like Florida State. The one major question mark I would have is I want to see what he can do without Jordan Travis. Now, they developed Jordan Travis very well under Mike Norvell, and I would imagine a lot of that is Norvell. He is known as an offensive guy. I'm curious to see what, the next 2 or 3 quarterbacks look like there. Yeah, that could be very telling. Do you have Florida State in your top 10, Ashton?
Look, man,
Tough,
this is
right?
where it's very, very difficult for me. I have 9 programs that, like, when you just go through the list, it's like, well, I mean, that's a top 10 program. I mean, you got to put them in there somewhere. The problem is I have like 5 or 6 teams for this last spot. And I really are we going to sit here and say Clemson's not a top 10 program? Like, they've won 2 championships in the last number of years.
Yeah.
The recruiting's actually really good again this year. I don't know if you look, like, Clemson's actually recruiting excellent right now. Yeah. Like, we're gonna say that, like, Florida State, yeah. How am I supposed to leave them out? Like, Oklahoma, Penn State, Tennessee, A&M. Like, there's so many teams that are right here on the edge for me.
Yeah.
Who do you have at 10? And then I can be convinced. I'm between like 2 or 3.
Yeah. My number 10 is Clemson. I respect a little bit too much of what they've done, not in the last 3 years, but in the last 7 or 8 years. And they've still been a good program on the field the last 3 years. They beat Notre Dame last year. So, go ahead, Ashton.
Well, counterpoint, in some of like the metrics, which we love, or you more than me, but like the F+ metrics, they haven't actually been a top 15 any of the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And the recruiting has tailed off a little bit, and we're seeing it maybe pick up a little bit next year. But there's a counterpoint here that I could just easily throw out there is that, they haven't been a top 15 team in 3 years, and they haven't really even been competitive against those top 10 teams, especially in 3 years.
It's fair. I like that they still have the coach that they had when they won 2 titles. Like, that's a big deal. And I know he's been a little slow to adapt. I'm not convinced he won't adapt. I'm not convinced he won't start embracing the portal. Now, we haven't seen it yet. I still think that defense is going to be just ridiculously good this year and in coming years. Honestly, in my mind, the biggest difference between Clemson 2016, 2018, and then the last 3 years and maybe this year, those really highly ranked quarterbacks worked out about as well as you could imagine. And the last couple highly ranked quarterbacks have not worked out as well as you could imagine. Other than that, I don't know that there's a lot different. I mean, receiver, a little bit different. They got a freshman this year, Wesco, who they are very high on. He's been making plays in spring practice. To me, they are neck and neck with Florida State as top dog in the ACC. And by the way, they could end up being in different conferences in a couple of years. And I mean, different from each other. Like, it's possible one goes to the Big Ten, one goes to the SEC. Maybe they both go to the SEC. I don't know what's going to happen. But as long as we have the ACC, I view them as very much neck and neck. And that's for as a program and for the 2024 season. Like it's very much a toss up in my mind about which team, which program is better. I ended up going with Florida State because the trajectory is better. Like Clemson's trajectory, if anything, is slightly going down. I don't love what I'm seeing from Cade Klubnik. I don't know if you watched the spring game.
Yeah.
They still don't believe that he's really the guy. Like
There's
it
there's a
doesn't.
chance. There's a non-zero chance he doesn't start this year.
That's true. I also like their next 5-star, Christopher Vizina. I hesitate to even say this because it's reading way too much into a stupid little spring game. He didn't look great to me either. And maybe that is just their defense is insane. Like that very well could be it. I'm just saying it's possible. The reason I have him this low is it feels like maybe their quarterback luck flipped a little bit.
Well, I mean, they were hitting on every single 5-star quarterback they got, right? Like they were just hitting home runs every single time, and also not just with quarterback but receiver as well.
Yeah,
they were just hitting home run after home run. It's a fair point. I still haven't answered as to who I'm going to have at 10 here.
It's hard.
It is hard. I have to put Florida State there just out of respect for the season they had last year and the job that Norvell did there. The recruiting has not been on par with Penn State. Penn State was another team that I also had kind of in that list with Clemson. I had Clemson, Penn State, and Florida State competing for that 10 spot. I'm going to put Florida State there just because I thought they produced better on the field than the other teams did the last couple of years. I've been really impressed with the job that Norvell has done in developing players. He's also a guy that's very portal heavy as well, kind of TBD on how that works out in the long term, but it's definitely worked out for him so far. So I would like to see the recruiting pick up just a little bit. They're recruiting at like top 15 level. It'd be nice to see them come like sneak on into the top 10 and get on up there. I'm going to have Florida State at 10. This feels almost low with a lot of these teams. I'd like to put all these teams in the top 10. There's only 10 spots,
Yeah.
So by definition, you're going to be leaving some guys out, which you hate to do. So yeah, I will go with Florida State to wrap it out.
It's so hard. There's 4 programs I feel pretty bad about not having in there. For me, it's Penn State, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. You have Ole Miss in there, not Clemson. So I would imagine if you feel, do you have the same top 14 as me in some order? Like I didn't order those 4. I just those are the 4 I felt the worst about. I don't feel that bad about not having Texas A&M, Auburn, Florida, Miami, USC. Like those don't feel like top 10 programs right now. Those other 4, they all kind of match the criteria we're looking for. It feels like we have 14 or so teams that could be top 10.
I mean, Utah, like what is Utah
Also
got to do
You're right.
to get some love to be up there? There's more. I mean, you can really kind of get into that a little bit. And you're right. Oklahoma, we didn't really mention. They were a team that was 13-14 range for me. But like I think Utah deserves to be there. And I think now that Utah's in the Big 12, we may actually talk about them, more. I mean, that's a team that's they've won the Pac-12 2 of the last 3 years and went to Rose Bowls and like the Pac-12 is no more. And
they could become the dominant program in a conference, in a Power 4 conference.
I believe that. I think that could happen. It's interesting just how much the changing dynamics have affected what we think and how we view these teams. But yeah, Utah is there for me. A program like Miami, who does not have the evidence on the field. They don't. It's not there. I'm not even trying to convince you of that. The recruiting has been elite. Yeah. They are so good at recruiting. Like when do you start to factor that in, in trying to, project like where they will be in a couple of years? That's a team with a really high ceiling. So there's teams like that probably deserve to be a little higher. Utah is probably too low. I think we have Utah too low. I would enjoy having Utah in the top 10. I couldn't justify putting them in there. The recruiting's not there. Like it's not to compete with teams that are winning titles like Clemson. So
they kind of feel like maybe they're exactly the 15th best program in the country.
Utah, you mean?
Yeah, Utah.
I would have them a little higher, but yes, like I agree with that. They're returning a ton of production though. and the coach that's just been there for forever. Like we talk about stability, those got like just so stable, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, you love the fact of they were just returning everyone. We get I think Cam Rising maybe made an appearance in the spring game. I didn't watch it. I heard that he did. Um, that's awesome. Be great to have
Yeah.
him back. So yeah, after missing all of last year. So yeah, Oklahoma's a good one too. Tennessee's right there. Yeah, you could talk me into Tennessee pretty quickly actually if they have a strong, another strong offensive season
Sure.
with Nico. So yeah, there's a lot there. We have to cut it off at some point. Like
Yeah.
you can't just put everyone into the top 10 even though you'd like to.
Sure. Well, I'll just recap our top tens. A lot of the same teams, but in shockingly different order. Shockingly is the wrong word. I'm pleasantly surprised we didn't just regurgitate the exact same 10 in the exact same order. But Ashton, your top 10: Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, Texas, Oregon, Ole Miss, LSU, Notre Dame, Florida State. My top 10: Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, Michigan, Oregon, Notre Dame, LSU, Florida State, Clemson. If we average these out, we'd have a few ties. So maybe sometime we have to call up a buddy or something and see if he can break some ties for us. But yeah, I always enjoy this exercise every off season. It is maybe more difficult this year than it's ever been for me.
It is not just because of the coaches leaving, even though that is part of it. Like the
Mm,
portal has also factored into it, and then also like realignment and as well as expansion, playoff expansion. It changes how you're going to think of these teams going forward. Teams like we talk about LSU, a team that could just sneak into the playoff. LSU could beat some of these teams ahead of them. Like they
yeah.
absolutely could. Like they've got the quarterback play and the coaching to do it. The talent is there. Like it's hard to project where these teams are, not just right now but like going forward. I think it's very difficult because like we talked about it last pod too. There's no data points. Like we don't have
Mm.
reference as to what these teams will do under this current structure and like how that might be different. So yeah, it is very fun. It's very difficult. It's an extremely hard thing. Go to yeah, just sit down and put a list together. It feels like it's impossible to get it right.
Just glancing over our list, by the way, half of these programs or more in our top tens, which are not exactly the same, have had the same coach for more than 3 years. So
Yeah.
that's part of it that makes it so hard. Is a lot of these programs still have pretty new coaches, and that the story is still being very much written on some of those guys for sure.